include a nightly lane and ramp closures along the 417 in order to do the resurfacing and the line painting. We will have to close the Riverside Vanier North and South terminals, as well as the Saint Laurent South ramp terminal during off-peak in order to take care of the transit priority lanes and signals. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any other questions, both Mr. Linden-Smith and myself are available at these coordinates, so please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I think there actually may be a few questions right here today. So Councillor Fleury first, followed by Councillor Chernyshenko.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Maybe just as a starting point, can you reassure us that the work would not proceed until the opening of light rail? I know that for us, that corridor is certainly one that is very important, not only for access into the city's core, but also for transit operations. So we're expecting, sometime in 2018 to open light rail, but we'd love to hear from you on if there were further delays, what that would mean for your project.
That's correct. We are very mindful of the need for buses to be running on the Queensway as they are now. So we'll structure our work so there's no conflict, pardon me, no conflict with that. And the work we would undertake in autumn would be work that could proceed while the buses are still using those lanes.
Excellent. These are questions that I submitted because there's a consultation hosted a few weeks ago, and I submitted those comments, and I never got a follow-up. But I'm intrigued by a couple of points. There are 4 points. One to me, which is ongoing safety concerns from people using. There's a weird sidewalk, which is a non-sidewalk at Nicholas and Laurier, that on the west side of the corridor going towards the 417, that people fall into what I'll call as a no man's land. Like you don't realize you're walking down Laurier, you turn right, yeah, it looks like an on-ramp, but there's a sidewalk that's available. So I'd ask for a physical measure to be implemented near Laurier, just so that we can protect the access to vehicular access only.
Yeah, I believe that intersection would fall strictly within the city's jurisdiction, but if there's any impacts with our project to that, we would certainly work with the city with any initiative to address that issue. So I believe it would be mostly a city issue, but if there's any MTO involvement, we'll assist the city if we can.
So can we take it as a takeaway from
Sure.
They formed my comments at the time. I had 4 comments, and some might fall onto the city. I'm just not aware as to.
Certainly, we'll discuss it with the city and okay, develop an approach between ourselves.
And my final one that's relevant for this committee is the angle of the turn. Obviously, you're limited by space there, but I think there's a series of elements starting on the 417. Like if you're going eastbound, and the folks that are entering on Isabella, and the folks that are trying to get either off at Lee's or off at the Nicholas off-ramp, there's some confusion elements there, and I think a lot has to do with line painting and actual signage, as we want folks to merge left sooner rather than keep progressing in that off lane. And then the other component that ties into that is the actual radius. Over the years, we've had trucks flip there. And I wonder how that is planned to be addressed as part of this.
The minimum radius that we'll provide is actually the same as existing, but because the structure is shifted westerly, there will be a greater area with that radius. And you're absolutely correct. We're challenged in space with respect to the presence of Lees Avenue, and any expansion of that loop would also have impact to the community to the west of the off-ramp, and would push the off-ramp further back toward Metcalfe as well. So you're absolutely right that we're challenged with space there. The geometry does meet our standards for radius, and we'll continue to post the conspicuous warning signs for trucks and what have you that we have in place today.
Okay, and just to that, because both the off-ramp and the on-ramp sort of connect with each other as they move through as they go through the movement, there's a portion that's really near each other, and we've seen when a vehicular crosses that portion and that it creates challenges. So I know that, for example, I think at Saint-Laurent, you've put a Jersey barrier in between. So is it part of the program here to correct that issue? So if there is any accident in one of the directions, that it doesn't impact both flows?
Yeah, I can speak to that. We have actually, as part of the design, we do have a concrete barrier along the two, or between the two ramps, coming off of the structure right around to where it's no longer necessary. So it will.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Chernushenko.
Thank you very much. It is the first time I've seen this presentation, and especially the detour proposals. And although there is time, I think, to work out some of the specifics, and maybe we can make something work there, I do want to flag a number of serious concerns to what I see already. You had a slide that showed from a wider perspective, the recommended detours, which included Main Street in that. Can we get that slide back up there, please? Yeah, if we could start with that one. So I guess my concern from the westbound direction, do I understand correctly this is the final, or at least this is your best recommendation, or do I understand that in the westbound direction you're no longer considering a route that involves Main Street, the Pretoria Bridge, Isabella, instead using that ramp surfing one? So your preferred proposal now is the ramp surfing option.
That's correct. Yeah.
Good, because I think we would all agree that rebuilding Main Street to become more of a residential street and then turning it into part of the Queensway for a while just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And I don't think it would work either in terms of volume. We've already seen with the extended closure of the Lees on-ramp eastbound and all of the traffic having to take the Pretoria Bridge, go around the Loblaws and then up and on. We've seen significant congestion on Pretoria Bridge and that whole area over a number of years that never used to exist and probably won't again once we get the Lees ramp open. So if we could go to the next slide then, where you are showing using Lees in the eastbound direction. There we go. Geographically, this is totally logical. It's the least distance to be traveled. It can work. Of course, my key concern is that Lees Avenue is effectively a residential street to many people. It has got wide sidewalks, it's got bicycle lanes, it's got local transit routes, and so although this could work, I think we'd have to do a lot of work into how exactly the signaling, people who have exited the Queensway are about to turn left onto Lees. That's phenomenal volume for a very occasional ability to make that turn. Same thing again, crossing back over to get onto the what's labeled as the southeast ramp, we call the Lees on-ramp. What length of period of time can you remind me, are you suggesting here for this?
We're looking at overnight weekend closure. Okay. Basically a Saturday to a Sunday night.
And just once?
And just there's two occasions where that will happen, right?
Two occasions.
But so yes, once over the weekend.
Okay. So essentially 2 weekends, if you will, and overnights. All right. So at least the volumes will be less. Of course, nighttime. It's a challenge around. I guess rather than in front of this committee, I hope we, including city staff, will work out as safe as possible possibly full-time police surveillance at those two left turns because of all of the crossover and quite different kinds of traffic. People who are coming from and expecting to do a fairly high-speed traverse of the city, and others who are very much in a residential mode, walking kids to school, etc. I think that's it for now. I guess I did not see anywhere in this the need to stage off of green spaces, parks, et cetera. That's always a concern when we're taking parkland and using it to build. This isn't a rapid lift bridge build, so we don't need that space. There may be construction workers, and there's a significant amount of vehicles associated with those people getting to the site and needing to park while they're there. Hopefully they're taking transit, but those who aren't able to, have you anticipated yet how you'll handle that?
Well, with any kind of bridge construction, there are, staging areas. They are and will be located within the MTO right away. And we will make provisions so that the workers can access those from various points, of course, without impeding traffic.
And there is a fair bit of MTO right-of-way there, so I guess what I would just say as an advance, I don't know if warning's the right word, request/warning, that the green spaces that are parkland and used for recreational purposes, be considered off limits on the use of otherwise nice to look at grassland, but otherwise unused green space be the first and best choice for any kind of staging.
There is also a landscape component to this project, so there will be, as part of the context-sensitive design, there will be some landscape provided as the final product.
That's final product, so
yes.
Which does mean in the end, in a sense, we can trash it because it's going to be parking vehicles doing other things. Trash it is too strong a word,
no,
but using land, tire tracks, creating mud, knowing that it's going to be landscaped and refurbished afterwards is not such a blow to anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Boy.
Thanks. At the end of your presentation, you said the magic word that I thought was going to lead you to answer the question I have relating to the 417 enclosures and updates, et cetera, is what is going on with the 417 ramp to the 174? It's closed because of the LRT detours. LRT is now 6 months behind schedule. Is that ramp going to open up when we open up LRT, or are the rumors that you're going to keep it closed for longer true? And if so, when is the government of Ontario going to open it up?
We met with city staff a week or 10 days ago to explore options at that ramp. And assuming the schedule for the LRT holds through, we believe we can do enough advance work without impacting traffic that would be able to reopen that ramp in 2018 after the light rail becomes operational and OC Transpo has no further need of that that transit priority measure. So, but barring a significant run of horrible weather, we think we can do that with the current timelines.
Perfect. So the 417 ramp will be open once LRT is open and the detours are done, barring extreme weather circumstances.
We have a resurfacing that we're going to do, the bulk of which will actually happen next year, although the contract would be awarded this year. But we will be able to open up that ramp this autumn, provided our schedule holds, and there might be some additional work next spring in the way of tidy up, but nothing like a closure like we've had for the past 3 years.
Sure. So the resurfacing you're talking about, you said next year, we're still in the early part of 2018. Do you mean that resurfacing work is in 18 or that resurfacing work is in 19?
We would resurface the ramp in the autumn of 18 because the ramp's currently closed, and that's the best time to do that. Yeah. We may have a little bit of paving work in the vicinity of the ramp that may have to happen in 19, which would mean possibly an isolated off-peak closure of that ramp for a very short period of time. Okay. But we are working with the city to try and open it this year.
Perfect. And just so we're clear on what extreme weather means, does it mean the tiniest bit of snow in October and November? Like, what is your definition of extreme weather that would stop the ramp from being open?
Some of the work that has to happen is temperature dependent, predominantly placing of paint. We think we can do most of that during the better weather months. at that specific location. So all we're trying to say is we just contingent on not having a run of horrible weather, and to try and predict in the future whether it's a week or 2 weeks or what would push us over the brink. It's very difficult to say.
I'm not asking you to predict what the weather is going to be. I'm trying to understand what is bad weather. Is it snow? How cold is cold? Like, what are the circumstances specifically?
Sorry, I misunderstood your question. Certainly snow and low temperatures would impede some of that work. Not the removal of pavement markings so much, but placing any new ones that had to go down. So we'll be working very closely with OC Transpo as the LRT date approaches to coordinate activities so we can be in there doing that work right after their requirement ends.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for this presentation? Okay. Received on the presentation? See? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Our next item is number 2 on the agenda, which again is the Ministry of Transportation, and this is the Highway 417 CPR O-Train Bridge replacement. So I'd ask the MTO team to come forward. While they're doing that, I'm going to ask Councillor McKenney, the Vice Chair, to introduce her motion on this particular issue, so you have it in front of you as you're hearing the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Just to briefly summarize, and then I'll read it out into the record. This is to accommodate the businesses on Preston who will be losing some of their on-street parking as we detour for this closure. So whereas the construction of the Ministry of Transportation Highway 417 CPR O-Train Bridge replacement is scheduled to start in the spring of 2018 and is expected to last for the period of approximately 1 year. And whereas a result, a partial closure of the Trillium multi-use pathway is required between Gladstone Avenue and Yonge Street to allow for the staging and construction of the overpass, and whereas a detour for cyclists and pedestrians is required, which will result in a loss of on-street parking spaces on Preston Street, Louisa Street, and Yonge Street. And whereas the loss of on-street parking in the area can be offset by promoting the use of city-owned parking lot on Preston Street, which will be helpful to local businesses that belong to the Preston Street Business Improvement area, as well as residents and visitors to the area. Therefore, be it resolved that Transportation Committee recommends that Council delegate to the General Manager of Public Works and Environmental Services the authority to modify the parking fees during the period of the CPR O-Train Bridge replacement construction in the city-owned lot located at 301 Preston Street to match the Preston Street on-street parking fee structure on weekdays from 5:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. The General Manager of Public Works and Environmental Services reserves the right to reassess this change after a few months so that rates at the lot can be reinstated if required.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. So I'll turn it over to you for the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee for having us in today. My name is Peter Frua. I'm the Senior Project Engineer with the Ministry of Transportation, Ontario. We're here to present to you the Highway 417 CPR O-Train Rapid Bridge replacements over the O-Train tracks. This is a very ambitious, technically and time-wise project. With me today I have WSP, who's the Ministry's consultant on this, and I will turn it over to them for the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lincoln McDonald. I'm the project manager for WSP. We'll start with a little bit of background on this project, make everybody aware of what's going on. So MTO completed a preliminary design and EA study for the rehabilitation and replacement of the Highway 417, what we call Midtown bridges, to define a bridge management plan for 23 bridges and 12 sites in the Queensway between Holland Avenue and O'Connor Street. And that was completed approximately 2 years ago. The study determined that the CPR O-Train bridges are nearing the end of their service life and are in need of replacement. The current detailed design project involves the replacement of the 417 bridges over the CPR O-Train corridor using rapid replacement technology, detouring of the Trillium multi-use pathway between Gladstone and Yonge Street during construction, and construction of related works including retaining walls, pavement rehab, drainage improvements, modifications to the existing illumination and ATMS systems, some utility relocations and landscaping as required. So for those not familiar with it, the O-Train CPR is located west of Preston Street interchange. The existing structure is 5-span, constructed in the early 60s. The new decks are to be replaced using a rapid replacement technology. The revised span width will accommodate the existing O-Train corridor. It protects for the future track widening and twinning that is, I believe, being proposed under the Trillium line design, and accommodates the existing multi-use pathway on the west side, as well as protects for a future pathway on the west side. And the existing structure is approximately 85 meters in length over 5 spans. So the required work includes the construction of new abutments, backfilling the existing approaches. They'll be constructed and backfilled to approximately 2 meters below the existing. That will happen while traffic is being maintained on the 417. The new bridge decks are being constructed to the north of the existing 417 on stands, if you want to call them that. And as part of the new technology, this rapid replacement methodology is different than what's been used previously on the Queensway. On the Queensway previously, they were used with transporters, with the bridges being built and then moved into place. In this case, they're being built on stands, and the methodology of replacement is called a jack and slide technology. So they'll be pushed into place into the new arrangement. During the single full closure of the 417, the existing bridges will be demolished in place and the debris will be removed, and that'll allow the new bridges to be slid into place. After the bridges are slid into place, the backfill operations will be completed, the road structure will be constructed, and the highway will be paved. After the rapid replacement weekend, construction will continue on 417 to address new approach slabs for the structures, median storm sewer that has to be built, some new median concrete barrier, as well as snow guards. Under the new bridges, the old piers will be removed, the temporary stands will get removed, and protection measures that are being put in place for the O-Train will be removed, and the reinstatement of the multi-use pathway and final restoration and landscaping will take place. So the construction site area is very contained and small. It's an extremely difficult site to work in. So as part of the negotiations with the NCC and with the City of Ottawa, we have developed a site area where the contractor can do his laydowns and operate and access the site. He'll be accessing off of Gladstone Avenue. Primarily his main corridor site will be the west side of the Loretta of the O-Train, adjacent to the Loretta Traffic Operations Facility. The ministry has entered into a property agreement with the Loretta facility to occupy their back parking lot as part of the staging area for this replacement. On the east side of the O-Train corridor, it's primarily NCC land, and an agreement is in the process of being obtained with them to occupy their land to be able to do the staging area. This is also the area, the side that the Trillium multi-use pathway is located. On the south side of the highway, there's a small corridor off the cul-de-sac at Yonge Street that is required to access that side of the structure. And on the west side is currently where 47 Yonge Street is occupied. And the ministry is in the process of purchasing that property, and that'll be used as a staging area as well. The multi-use pathway will be detoured along the south side of Yonge Street, north along the west side of Preston Avenue, westerly along Louisa Street, and then it'll come up through what is called, I guess, the Loretta Yards traffic lower yard. They have a traffic facility yard that they use for storage material. It'll be a bi-directional bike lanes on Yonge Street and the west side of Preston, and they're segregated from traffic. The bike lanes will share the lane on Louisa Street. The pathway, as I noted, is being realigned between Louisa and Gladstone. On-street parking will be moved from Yonge Street, Louisa, and along Preston Street between Yonge Street and Louisa Street. The City of Ottawa is currently providing the design for this detour map. O-Train protection. We're aware of the significance that O-Train has to the city and its transit operations. We've been in discussions with O-Train and are continuing to have discussions with O-Train. Unfortunately, certain construction operations cannot be performed while the O-Train is in service. Construction operations would need to stop every time a train approaches. Currently, the trains are running between 7 and 12 minutes. It really impacts production and makes it very difficult to carry out some of this work. O-Train closures currently are nightly from 12:30 to 5. However, due to the complexity of the construction, this construction window, which is less than 4 hours for productive operations, is too short. So in order to allow the bridge construction operations to proceed without continuous interruptions, a temporary CSP, corrugated steel pipe arch culvert, is being installed over the tracks within the bridge corridor and north of the bridge corridor underneath of where the temporary stands and the new bridges are being built. A 3-week closure has been negotiated with O-Train as required at the start of the construction in year 1 in order to install the protection measures over the O-Train. A second 3-week closure of the O-Train is required in the second year, and that's for the rapid replacement of the actual Highway 417 bridges, as well as the removal of the protection measures. O-Train closure periods currently are targeted for mid-July to mid-August to minimize impacts to train users and ensure that the train is in operation for the school season at the University of Carleton. Highway 417 closures. There is a 3-day, 82-hour closure required for the 417 to allow the rapid replacement operation to be undertaken. 417 will be fully closed from Carling Avenue to Bronson Avenue, including the on-ramps within this section of highway. As on past projects, the contractor is required to organize an incident management team, which will include members of the City of Ottawa's Traffic Incident Management Group, MTO operations and contract staff, MTO contract administrator, and the contractor's key staff. A communications plan will be in place to advise the City of Ottawa, OC Transport residents, and emergency services all planned closures and detours. So the detour route coming westbound, you'd get off at Bronson, along Carling, south on Bronson, along Carling, and then back on at the Carling westbound on-ramp. Eastbound traffic would get off at the Carling eastbound off-ramp, would proceed along Carling Avenue, and get back on via Chamberlain and onto the Isabella on-ramp. The Parkdale ramps, westbound on-ramp will remain open to all traffic. The eastbound on-ramp will be open only to emergency vehicles, so that the hospital still has access if they have to proceed. So a summary of construction staging and traffic impacts. So at the start of construction, there will be the 4th lane in this direction, in either direction on westbound and eastbound in this area will be closed. 3 lanes of traffic will be maintained during the peak hours. The ramps will be maintained for the most part. The acceleration, deceleration lanes for those ramps will be taken from the 4th lane. Before the actual rapid replacement, we will have nightly and weekend 417 lane reductions to allow for some pre-work that has to be done on the highway before the actual replacements. During the rapid replacement, there will be a full closure of the 417 from Carling to Bronson. The Carling Avenue eastbound on-ramp will be closed. The Carling westbound ramp, eastbound on-ramp will be closed. Parkdale Avenue eastbound on-ramp will be closed except for emergency services. Rochester Avenue and Bronson Avenue westbound on-ramps. So it's a 3-day closure, 82 hours in duration. Highway 417, closure of the 2 lanes of 417 eastbound requires the closure of the following ramps, and that's the Rochester Avenue West to North-South ramp and the Parkdale Avenue North-South to East ramp. Possibly up to 7 closures only on the weekends, though. Post-rapid replacement operations, we will require a requirement to close 2 lanes in the 417 to allow for the approach slabs and median barrier to be constructed. This will also impact the ramps at Rochester Avenue North-South ramp, westbound on-ramp, the Bronson Avenue North to Southwest westbound on-ramp, and the Lyon Avenue Northwest ramp, westbound on-ramp. Our contact information is there should you have any questions for myself or for MTO. I'd open the mics to the board if the committee has any questions.
Are there any questions? Okay, no, they're not. So thank you very much. And on Councillor McKinney's motion regarding parking, carried? Carried. Okay, and received on the presentation? Received. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have the right-of-way patio bylaw, review of pedestrian clearway and accessibility requirements for existing patios. We have a presentation on this, so I'm going to ask staff to come up. Following the presentation, we have a number of public delegations, so I'll ask for councillors to hold their questions until after the public delegations if they have any questions for staff. So thank you very much, and I'll let you introduce the presentation, and off you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Rob McLachlan. I'm a bylaw review specialist with the right-of-way branch. On my left is Jake Ravel, program manager with Bylaw and Regulatory Services, Linda Karkner, program manager of the right-of-way branch, and Court Curry, manager of Rowhead. And as mentioned, we're here today to speak to the report dealing with the right-of-way patio and specifically the review of the pedestrian clearway and barrier-free access issues for existing patios. Firstly, a bit of background. As the committee is well aware, last year in March, a new standalone bylaw for the regulation of patios was put into place with respect to those within the road allowance, and 2 key requirements regarding those were that a pedestrian clearway, being that space requiring for unencumbered and clear pedestrian travel next to the patio, be provided at a minimum of 2 meters, and also that barrier-free access of the patios in accordance with the city's accessibility design standards be provided. For those patios existing at the time the bylaw was passed, a 1-year reprieve was provided up until April 1st of this year to comply with those. The caveat to that being that those patios along Elgin Street were provided by council with relief from these 2 requirements until such time as the pedestrian clearway was reinstated after the Elgin Street reconstruction. Staff were, at the time the bylaw was passed, required to report back to committee on the progress that had been made in designating the pedestrian clearway next to these existing patios, as well as the extent to which these patios comply with the city's accessibility design standards. Turning first to the pedestrian clearway, and I think it's important for context that we begin with a brief overview of the regulations that apply to the pedestrian clearway. The first is the Provincial Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or the AODA, which requires that for newly constructed or redeveloped pedestrian clearways after January 1st of 2016, that a 1.5 meter width be provided. The next is the city's accessibility design standards, which provides that a 1.8 meter wide pedestrian clearway be provided, or where a lesser width is provided, that at intervals of no greater than 30 meters, a 1.8 by 1.8 passing area be provided. And you'll see on the slide there a graphic representing those 2 situations. As a best practice, the ADS also provides that where feasible, a 2-meter pedestrian clearway should also be provided. The right-of-way patio bylaw codifies this best practice requirement in requiring at a minimum a 2-meter wide pedestrian clearway with the intent that the City of Ottawa be a leader in accessibility in this particular area. Based on a review of 87 patios, 52 of these were identified by staff as having a pedestrian clearway next to them that was less than 2 meters in width. These locations were provided to Parsons, who was hired to document the actual pedestrian clearway next to these patios, as well as to document the location of city infrastructure within this area. Parsons was also asked to identify possible solutions to achieve a minimum 2-meter pedestrian clearway in these situations. Overall, the review identified that these pedestrian clearways next to existing patios complied with the AODA and the city's ADS. And in addition, in at least 40 of these existing patios, the pedestrian clearway was narrowed between the patio and city infrastructure such as bike racks, pay and display machines, and traffic and parking signs. Opportunities were also identified to investigate where patios could be moved away from the building face to curbside or street side locations in order to achieve a minimum 2-meter pedestrian clearway. And lastly, there were some instances where the location of infrastructure, such as hydro poles and rankers, or the width of existing sidewalks meant that there would be, despite any modifications to the patio footprint, no real gains to the width of the pedestrian travel achieved. And I'll speak more to this when we get to the recommendations of the report. Parsons also reviewed the extent to which the 87 patios provided for barrier-free or universal access. 37 of the patios were found not to be universally accessible, 32 of which were ones which employed a platform. Solutions include bringing the patio closer to or to grade, or where necessary, utilizing a ramp. Going forward, ramps will need to be designed in accordance with the accessibility design standards of the city. Since Parsons completed this work, staff have been meeting with existing patio owners to discuss the findings relevant to their patio and discussing the options available for coming into conformity with the bylaw. Again, based on the findings of Parsons, staff have several recommendations for committee and council consideration. The first of these is that the bylaw be amended to provide the general manager with the delegated authority to permit a lesser clearway width than 2 meters next to existing patios in those situations where the abutting sidewalk is itself less than 2 meters in width, or where there is immovable infrastructure such as hydro poles and anchors standing between the patio and the sidewalk. In these instances, of which staff are aware of 13, no real gains to the area of travel for pedestrians can be achieved by making the existing patio move back. Recognizing that existing patio owners will face a cost to modify their patios to meet the requirements of the bylaw, staff are also recommending a one-time fee reduction for existing patio owners this summer patio season. The reduction is proposed to equal 25% of the permit fee up to a maximum of $2,000. To qualify, an existing patio owner will need to modify their patio to come into conformity with the bylaw. Staff are also seeking $50,000 to cover the cost of removing infrastructure within the pedestrian clearway next to existing patios, and both of these recommendations are proposed to be funded by the provision for unforeseen and one-time expenditures. Lastly, staff are recommending that the waiver for the pedestrian clearway requirement for the patio associated with Pub Italia continue. This waiver was granted by council in 2012, and the patio has not changed since this time. In terms of next steps, staff will continue to work with patio owners to identify options for coming into conformity with the bylaw and meeting the requirements for the pedestrian clearway as well as the ADS. The staff will work to remove infrastructure or relocate infrastructure where possible, and will continue ongoing patio inspections and enforcement of patio permit conditions as well as the bylaw as required. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the staff that worked on this report. I know it's been a long time coming, and there's been a real focus on making our sidewalks a lot more usable by everybody, with every mode of transportation. in that regard, I also want to thank Councillor Caudry in his role with the Accessibility Advisory Committee and acting as a very able sounding board on some of these discussions. And so I want to thank you for your role in this as well. We have a number of delegations to speak to this. So again, if you could hold your questions for staff. And the first, I'm going to try this, is Dennis Van Stel Dunyan? Close? Close. From the Wellington West Business Improvement Area. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think you've been here before, so you know the rules. You have 5 minutes.
Den Van is much easier, but Van Steldynen for the record. Good try, though. Most people don't even attempt it. Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, councillors, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today about this important matter. I speak on behalf of the Wellington West Business Improvement Area as the newly minted Executive Director of this association, and this is my first chance to present to this committee. But as your area of expertise is of great concern to my members in terms of parking, in terms of patios, in terms of bicycles and multimodal transportation, I don't imagine it'll be the last. I'd also like to thank the staff and consultants who've done such a diligent job on this particular file over the past few years, and I really appreciate their meeting with us to go in detail and their responsiveness in getting us information upon request. It is our job as a BIA to improve the Wellington West corridor and thus bring life, energy, and animation to the public spaces along it. And the proliferation of restaurant patios along our corridor, from only a small handful at our founding in 2008 to more than a dozen today, has actually always been one of our metrics of success as a business improvement area. We measure our success by how many patios we have and how much life they bring to our neighborhood. So it's a little disorienting for me as someone new to your subject matter to read the report and to hear the language that's being used that speak of patios in exactly the opposite way. Where bylaw language treats patios as obstructions to the clearway, we see opportunities for people of all abilities and ages to sit and enjoy the summer sun. Where staff views streets and sidewalks as rights-of-way, we see public spaces for people to slow down, linger, and explore our neighborhoods. Where your committee manages patios as encroachments in the same category that you manage construction blockages and hoarding, we see patios as a real estate manager might as capital enhancements to our area. So while we understand and we absolutely approve of the thrust of this effort, we look at it a little bit differently. And we understand that a bylaw is a blunt instrument and there are good reasons. But we appreciate and share the goal to make sure our streets and patios are as accessible as possible to everyone. What's missing among all the charts and measurements in the report and the presentation you've seen is any fulsome discussion of the benefits of patios to all users of the neighborhood, the time, cost, and stress level encroachment that these changes impose on the business owners, and I might add the painfully short notice given to them of their exact infractions and of the options available to them, or the risk that a patio might disappear entirely, and that's what I'm hearing, due to the requirements becoming too onerous, and of course the possibility that the business itself might close down if they cannot make the money that they have anticipated for this season. So we'd like to ask you for consideration on a few points. First of all, we support wholeheartedly efforts to improve accessibility of the patios themselves. Access to those patios is something we are not going to comment on. We will work with your staff and members to bring existing patios into compliance and ensure new patios also conform. We strongly agree with that point. We support the principle of wider clearways as the standard for all future patios. We think these regulations are forward-looking and reasonable and set a standard for the city that is ahead of the game in terms of the province. We also support the proposed fee reductions and funds to move city infrastructure where reasonable and necessary as considerations for people who put in the time and effort to make the changes. We also ask for a permissive approach to non-obstructing patios along existing sidewalks. So we support the recommendation where in cases like the Carlton Tavern, where the side patio does not intrude on the existing sidewalk at all or any municipal infrastructure, we support delegation of authority to the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development to deal with those issues on a common sense basis, and I think that will be one where there will be an absolute slam dunk for the existing patio. But for patios where significant changes to the structure of the patio are required, we ask strongly for more time and leniency in the application of the guidelines, particularly regarding the two seasonal patios at Bar Laurel and at Tennessee Willems. Both of those patios are less than 5 years old, and the bar managers and restaurant owners built those in good faith under the existing rules, and they were a little surprised to find that they were in contravention and that it was going to be coming up this coming year. In cases like them, they may be in violation of the change rules, but we ask for reasonable consideration. And we also ask to consider the broader benefits these patios bring, the low level of complaints or actual problems that they've generated thus far, or at least if there are those complaints or problems, make sure that they're added to the record so that we can consider them as well. And also the fact that they're completely removed and therefore offer no obstruction for 6 months of the year. You have a fully wide and accessible sidewalk for most of the year. It's only during the summer months, which is when they also add their benefits. So in the longer term, though, and this is where I'm a little bit at sea as someone new to this process, but it seems to me that I'd like to ask for a process where you could consider...
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Reasonable adjustments, something like a committee of adjustment or an application process where small infractions like the 3 centimeters for the Bar Laurel infringement could be considered and applied for by the community, considered by the community. I thank you for your time today, and we as a BIA stand eager to help you with the implementation of the suggestions above.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the delegation? Yes, Councillor Manette.
Yeah, you mentioned more time and leniency. What type of time frame are you looking at?
Well, certainly, I was just on the phone with the owner of Bar Laurel, and he's only had really 2 weeks to look at the recommendations and to react. Now, if you think of the time frame involved with actually planning and applying for a patio in the first place and all of the consultations and delays that are required, I would say that at least a year between finding out what the mitigations required are and being expected to respond to them would be reasonable. They're being asked to actually respond by the application for this patio season this spring.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for the delegation? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Our next delegation is a trio coming up to share their 5 minutes. Oh, I see. So you're not coming up together then? No. All righty. First we have Ms. Jennings, who's just clarified that for us. Thank you. Followed by Todd Brown, rather, and then followed by Steve Minook.
Sorry. Morning. Morning, everyone. Nice to see you again. My name is Yasna Jennings, Executive Director of the Byward Market BIA, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I think we could probably echo some of the comments of my colleague. Patios are a very important element to both the overall business model of our restaurateurs and the general appeal of the area to visitors. Patios contribute to the safety of an area by providing eyes on the street, are a tourism draw, and contribute to the overall enjoyment of our city. It was roughly a year ago that we were here last speaking about patios. The BIA has always supported the spirit and intent of the new bylaw and support the efforts to be more globally accessible, but we challenge the manner of application and implementation. It was our understanding that staff would work with the businesses and come back with recommendations to assist them with compliance. However, the report was only released this past Friday. This is simply not enough time for businesses to react and make the required changes. Therefore, we are also requesting a deferral for the implementation of the new rules. In order to be compliant, businesses need to completely redesign and reconstruct their patios. Engineering drawings are required. Materials need to be chosen, purchased, delivered. Final designs need city approval, and contractors need to be secured for construction. Patio season starts April 1st. Clearly, there is no time for businesses to achieve all of this in this tiny little time frame. May and June are the busiest times in the market. We have repeatedly and consistently objected to any construction or disruptions taking place in the spring. Spring is not the time to start construction to try to make patios compliant. It is simply not feasible. Staff, contractors, and all permits, etc., will be done by April 1st. The highest volume of tour buses come through the area in May and June, and spring sets the tone for the whole season for locals. Construction should be scheduled, to lose this vital business window would be devastating to businesses. Construction should be scheduled in the fall where negative impacts are greatly minimized. This infrastructure and process costs tens of thousands of dollars and includes design, construction, installation, dismantled, storage. Every inch was carefully planned to accommodate the original regulations, the existing sidewalk conditions, city infrastructure, etc. In order to meet the new requirements, all platforms will need to be renovated or in most cases completely reconstructed. 3 weeks is simply not enough time for businesses, and businesses want to get it right. Unlike most other neighborhoods in the urban core, most of whom have all had major investments, improvements, and even expansions to their right-of-way, the Byward Market is plagued with aging infrastructure and limited sidewalk space. In order to provide a safe and secure surface for both their customers and staff, most businesses have had to design and construct patio platforms to address issues of sidewalk sloping, uneven, and/or patchy work on sidewalks. Therefore, simply relocating patios directly on the sidewalk is really not possible in most cases. Finally, we recently learned of the next phases of the Byward Market Revitalization Plan. It includes a full review of the district's right-of-way and public spaces. This presents the perfect opportunity for a full patio review in the market. A holistic approach is the best way to go. Opportunities were also identified way back in 08 and 09 through our local parking study, and patios and public places were also a recommendation in the PPS report, which drove the Byward Market revitalization process. It makes no sense, nor is it acceptable or respectful to burden businesses with major costs to make changes this year, only to risk having to do it all over again in a year or two once the public realm review is done. In conclusion, we respectfully request that implementation of the new patio rules to existing patios in the Byward Market be deferred until the completion of the public realm work. We truly believe that a wide variety of opportunities and innovative approaches exist, but will only be realized through a more comprehensive and encompassing look at all the public realm elements in the market. This approach is in fact the most civically responsible and fiscally prudent approach to the goal of an overall improved experience for all. Thank you. Do I still have time? Well, I'm only asking because Lori Meller from the Preston BIA just contacted me. She's in dental surgery, and she had the same impression. Their businesses, too, were under the understanding that once the recommendations came out, they were going to start working with city staff for those that had to be compliant. So they, too, have also asked for a deferral to allow the work to happen and time for all these changes.
Thank you. We'll have questions for city staff after all the delegations, though it's certainly been my understanding that city staff has been meeting with individual businesses for quite some time now and having discussions about what was coming down the pipe, but we'll deal with that. Though Councillor Forty has indicated he would like to ask one question to staff which is directly related to something that you've raised, so I'm going to allow that.
So I guess the question is for court. Yasna was speaking about the holistic component, which obviously I think we're all on the same page that we want the area to have, an improved look and feel, an improved public realm, and so on. And I know that your team and Dana more specifically and Jillian are working on those efforts. Maybe you could speak to how this effort how does it impact that review, and how will those kind of tie in together at some point?
So, Councillor, we'll be embarking upon this spring a public realm plan for the Byward Market precinct writ large. That plan development, which will have extensive stakeholder consultation, will take approximately about a year, and the outcomes of that will be potential redesigns for some of the corridors where we do have patios currently. But that will lead to a capital project that at this time has no funding and will be subject to future capital budget asks. That's a multi-year rollout. At best, I think we'd be in a position to put forward some money for design in 2020. So we've taken a practical approach with the conversations we've had with patio owners thus far to look at options that are minimal in terms of changes that need to be made between now and then, but recognizing that an overall implementation of a larger plan is many years away. Very much. Any other questions for delegation? Yeah, Councillor Kakish.
Thanks, Chair. And I just wanted to clarify, because the Chair had mentioned that staff have been working with businesses on that April deadline. And you were saying that the BIA representatives are saying that you kind of didn't know. So I just want to clarify, have you been talking to staff over the past few months, and were you aware of the timelines and asked for them to be pushed, or did you just find out when this report went live last week?
So we were as the BIA, we were contacted near 3 weeks ago. It was just a couple of days. We were smack in the middle of Winterlude, and that was our first contact from staff. But I do know some businesses had spoken with staff, but again, they were under the impression that this report was going to come out, recommendations, and then we were going to kind of look at the at what that meant and how they could start, looking at altering their patios. But most people were really, again, we're April 1st. Most of their patios actually are going up even in time for St. Paddy's Day. So many of them were kind of taken aback that they would have to do it immediately. They thought this was kind of going to be the process, that we were working through the process.
Okay, and so since you were notified around that time a month or so ago, have you been raising concerns about that timeline with staff, working with them on that?
Yeah, yes, actually, my vice chair is here, so he met with staff, I think, about 2 weeks ago, so he can comment on that.
Okay. I'd like to know what staff have told you in those conversations.
Well, we actually were, we just had a conversation shortly before the meeting, and there's definitely a misunderstanding. And one of the business owners, had said, I'm pretty on the ball with all of these things, and I even was really under the impression that once the recommendations came out, then we were going to start, working together to see what we could do. And for most people, I think they would be looking at making changes in the fall. If we're going to have to move poles, if we're going to have to move things, if there's going to be small construction improvements or changes, that those types of things would come about in the fall after we've kind of worked through the bigger process.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Councillor Kakish. Just again, for clarification of staff, we're hearing from Ms. Jennings that you first met in February about this project with her BIA. Is that accurate? Just the first time you met this past February?
Chair, in response to that, no, we started meetings in November with the individual patio owners to identify where they had clearway issues or accessibility issues on their patios. So those meetings started last November.
But more particularly, meetings with Ms. Jennings or on behalf of the BIA was the first one this past February?
Yes, the meetings with the BIA itself was in February.
Businesses that were impacted that Ms. Jennings has referenced, you started meeting with them in November of last year?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Troy.
I just want to clarify, because I do think there might be an issue of that you described, Yasmin, in terms of touch points and progress, and that's a fair statement. But we did meet, and I believe someone from your team was there last year when I think Linda and Court and I met with businesses along Clarence and along York ahead of 2017 to speak to some of the changes that had been approved, but that we weren't going to, we were going to give a year's leeway. So I'm confused now as to, at that time, this committee had given direction to staff, had it not? Like, that's, maybe we can take a second and hear from staff onto how far back that goes, because when I met with businesses last year, given kind of a year's touch point, and I'm not sure as to how we find ourselves now at what feels new information when maybe not everyone, but at least some of the members were aware at the time, and there is some direction from committee to do some work.
So, Chair, it was a year ago, actually, a year and a day, that we were in this room, and recommendation 3 of our report, as a result of our stakeholder feedback, was to defer implementation of components of the bylaw related to accessibility for 1 year. And that was specifically because we heard from our business owners that 2017 was an important year, this was a lot of change, and we needed time to get this right. So council concurred with that, and we, as Rob noted, hired a consultant to design per patio what we've called placemats, which was various options that they could undertake to comply with the bylaw. Throughout 2017, we sent 2 pieces of correspondence to all permit holders, letting them know that council had approved a new bylaw with a 1-year reprieve. We then, as Ms. Karkner indicated, started meeting with individual patio owners in the fall to go over the potential options for their specific patios, as well as with the BIAs. So certainly, I think we have done a good job in terms of engaging with the BIAs and patio owners beyond the 1-year reprieve. What was at issue in the last few weeks was some of the recommendations in the report to city costs. Would we be able to put forward funds to remove city infrastructure to assist in creating a wider clearway? And would we be able to offer a reduction in permit fees beyond the 22% fee reduction that council gave last year for patio permit holders in order to help property owners and patio permit holders transition costs? And so that wasn't, of course, we weren't able to reveal that until the report was published last Wednesday.
Okay, great. So yes, I'll follow up when the question comes to staff relating to the relief and some of the strategies that can be looked at. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Brown, Todd Brown is next. Good morning, welcome. You have 5 minutes.
I'm a partner in about 25 different restaurants in this city, including Pure Kitchen, El Camino, Clock Tower Brew Pubs, numerous places in the Byward Market. I have had exactly 2 30-minute meetings with city staff over this issue. And it was on the street informally. That is hardly enough time and effort put into discussing the issue with us. This is a very important issue, and it needs to be deferred, and we need to really look at it and decide how we're dealing with it. Most of my patios are on their way up. Patio season starts April 1st. We're 3 weeks away. We're understanding today, and I'm a pretty sophisticated business person. I'm understanding today that we have to do this. I did not understand that. I had no idea that was happening. That's all I'd like to say.
Thank you. Any questions? I have a question. How many businesses of yours or that you have an interest in would be impacted by the changes?
Well, again, I'm not quite clear on that. I haven't really seen, I've shown a few of the places. I would think 10 to 15 of them, but I'm not clear. There's no implementation plan, there's no timing of how all of this is supposed to get done, and patios are supposed to go up April 1st.
Okay, because
some of our patios are already up. We left them up through the winter. Under the new bylaw.
Correct, and you were allowed to do that. And well, I'll follow up with staff, but my understanding is that all impacted businesses have been met with, and discussions potential changes necessary have been had. So when it's time to ask questions to staff.
As I said, there were 2 informal meetings that happened on sidewalks. I've not seen the written stuff. I've not seen how we're going to implement this. I've not seen any of that.
All right. And you say you think you have 15 businesses.
I could have 15 businesses that are impacted by it, yes.
Is it possible, sir, that because you have multiple interests and multiple interests, that staff may have spoken to one of your business partners or managers of the locations?
I don't think so.
But you don't know?
No, I don't think so. I'm the person that would be dealing with construction on all the patios.
Okay. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Just a quick question to staff. How many patios will be impacted by this change across the city?
Mr. Chair, there should be 61 patios that would need to make, there'd be about 61 patios that would need, based on 2017 records, that would need to make a change either with respect to the accessibility design standard portion or the clearway portion of the patio bylaw.
And how many for the clearway?
I believe there are, Mr. Chair, approximately 47.
Thank you.
Is that it, Vice Chair?
Yeah.
And the 47 in and around the, has staff had discussions with each of those 47 businesses?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I can't say definitively that discussions have happened all, but all have been contacted to try and arrange discussions, and most have been met with, yes.
And most have responded. Okay, thank you. Councillor Flory.
Just to follow up, Todd, thank you for being here, and I know that you don't show up at committee often, so I certainly know that you're here because it impacts you directly, and it's of concern to you. So appreciate you taking the time to be here. Is it possible, and I spoke to staff about this, that it may be a technicality, but to get a patio, is it possible that it's the general manager or different staff that actually goes in and submits and it's under a different name? Because my understanding is that there's not a bulk of patios that are under one contact person. There's multiple contact persons for most of the patios. So is it possible that maybe you could work offline to establish those contacts for each of those encroachments? Because I fear that that's what's happening here, that there's someone that goes and gets the permits, that puts their name, and as you've highlighted, you're a partner. Obviously, there's a lot of employees as well that are involved in your business. Is it possible that would have happened as part of this?
All my encroachment permits are applied for by one person, Sue McLeod, in my office. She approves all of that with, goes through the layouts and what they're going to look like. Okay. At this point, we would just be putting our patios up, sending in the permit for the application even after the patio is up. And as far as we're concerned, the application always is dealing with the fees and not with the construction of the patio. These are all existing patios, and that would be how we would install our patios every year. We would put them up, she'd contact the city, find out how much money we got to pay, and send the checks. Okay. That's the application process. And I want to say here that we support the idea of what's going on here. We really do support this idea. We just don't think it's being dealt with properly, and there's not enough time put into it. And it should be done right. And then in the Byward Market in particular, where there's going to be a public realm study, why are we rushing all of this? I don't understand.
Okay, thank you.
Just one last question for you, sir. So in terms of the deferral, are you on the same page as Ms. Jennings, that it should be put off to the floor? Or are you saying something different?
No, I'm in complete agreement with that idea. Assuming we get results and assuming that we actually get things done, yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that means.
So I want to get it deferred to the fall, but if we haven't reached a resolution by the fall, then it should get deferred till everyone's in agreement of how we go forward, and that there's an implementation implementation plan.
That's not exactly how it works. You can agree to disagree with something that we vote on, but obviously we're trying to get to a consensus point, but that's not always the case. Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Minuk. Sorry, Councillor. Yes, I do. I do. Councillor Deans.
I just want to understand a little bit more about when you said you had 2 informal meetings. It just comes as a surprise to me that it would be on an informal basis that the city staff would be reaching out to the businesses impacted by this change. So what do you mean informal? You just happen to be there one day and they drop by? Or?
No, they contact us for a meeting, but we go and we're standing on a street corner and we're looking at the street, and how is that a formal meeting?
Okay, well, I actually think that's a good meeting because the on-site location is perfect because you're looking at exactly what you're looking at. I thought you meant, when you said informal, I'm conjuring up images that they just happen one day.
Well, again, they were just discussions of something that we would like to do. So to me, a formal meeting is where there's a proposal, you have something in writing, you look at it, and you make comments on that exact thing.
Okay, but it has been coming for a year, so there has been...
I did not have that understanding as well.
Did the city staff send written notification to the impacted businesses in the last year, to all of them?
Yes, we did. Following Council's approval of the bylaw last year, information was sent to all of the patio owners on record at that time, letting them know the new patio bylaw and what the new requirements were. In addition, when we met on site, we did provide the placemats that showed where there were issues and identified any ADS non-compliance for each location.
Okay, so every single impacted patio has had a written notification and an on-site meeting with an explanation of the changes required on their particular site.
Yes, they have.
Well, I have to disagree with that.
Again, it doesn't quite work that way. If Councillor Deans wants to ask you the question.
Sorry.
Would you agree with that?
I have to disagree with that comment. I certainly believe we were working in a direction of coming up with solutions, but I still don't see what the solutions are. We're unsure of everything.
What I'm hearing from city staff is they gave you information that showed what the changes would be, and they met on site with you.
They talked about the 2-meter clearance. They talked about how there were things in the way. We suggested that they get removed. We suggested them raising sidewalks. There were many suggestions. There was no talk of the implementation and the timeline and that we were working together. And all of a sudden, we see this thing. In fact, I just saw 3 days ago.
Okay, and when you said you have, I think you said you're partners in 25 restaurants in Ottawa, and you had 2 on-site meetings. So is it because the other 3 facilities aren't impacted by the changes, or?
Well, in fact, the on-site meetings were really just for the Byward market. And so I'm not aware of anywhere else where I may have impact. I don't think I do. But I'm not aware of any others.
Because they notified every single one where there's an impact. So of your Ward 25, perhaps only 2 are impacted by these changes.
I think there's numerous ones that are impacted by the changes.
Would that be correct?
I apologize, I don't know all of Todd's restaurants, so
But you would have contacted him about each one had they been impacted?
Yes.
So then they mustn't be impacted, it says.
That would be my assumption, but without going through the list and knowing exactly what Todd has, I can't definitively say that there was something.
Thank you.
Can I just comment?
Question?
Can I just comment on that?
Unfortunately, you can't.
Okay.
It's the Vice Chair's turn to ask some questions, so that may come up.
Okay. because I'm trying to get, and you confused me a little bit. I thought it was clear, but then something you said confused me. I'm just trying to get clearly what is being asked for in terms of another deferral, because this was deferred through 2017 at the request of the BIAs and businesses. But if you're asking for a deferral again, and I'm putting you on the spot because you're up here, but Ms. Jennings was up, and others will come up. Let's just play it out. If we were to say, okay, to the fall, what would you see? Like, do you see your responsibility in any way to change the design of your patios that are impacted to meet the 2-meter clearance for pedestrians and persons with disabilities?
If that is the only solution that is going to work, then certainly we would have to, and I would hope that the city would want to share in some of that expense. I certainly want to work with everyone on that, yes.
So my next question then is to staff, is in your recommendations then you're contemplating sharing some of that expense, doing what we can if it's on our part to move, a sign or a bench if possible, but ultimately it is the business owner's responsibility if we pass this either today or pass it today with deferring implementation till the fall. Is that correct?
Certainly, Chair. The intent has always been collaboration, which is why we did hire Parsons to undertake a study per patio, every single patio that's under our right-of-way patio bylaw, and present to the patio owner some options. At the end of the day, we have to rely on them to provide with the design that meets their business needs within the rules. But it was a really good process in the fact that it also gave us the opportunity to speak to patio owners about other opportunities that they weren't aware of, street side spots, now curbside spots, not having to have risers necessarily where they thought that they did. So certainly we have always been approaching this in the spirit of collaboration through the work that Parsons did and Linda's team going out. And yes, the intention was to carry that forward with the removal of city infrastructure on our side that we can do to clear up the clearway even more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Vice Chair. Just a quick follow-up question. So I just want to be absolutely clear what you're asking for here. It seems that you're asking for, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a deferral to the fall is fine as long as we agree with you at the end of that. If we want to put the bylaw in as it's currently proposed, which I getting suspicion you're not crazy about, then a deferral to the fall is not going to solve your problem.
I actually didn't say I wasn't crazy about the bylaw. It's, it needs to be deferred. We need to discuss it. That's all. And so I'd like to see the deferral till the fall.
No, but again, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you clarified that statement or put context around that statement a couple of times by saying if we can come to an agreement, if we can come to a consensus.
So, I guess what you're asking me about is the bylaw. It's not the bylaw I'm talking about. It's the solutions that I'm working out with city staff that I'm talking about. You have a bylaw that gives a framework. I'm fine with the framework. It just needs to get, the implementation of that framework needs to get delayed till the fall.
So you don't quarrel with the 2-meter clearway?
I'm not quarreling with the 2-meter clearway, no.
Okay, just because I think I speak for all of us, we weren't sure, because some of your comments seem to suggest you want to work towards a different bylaw, a different resolution.
No, that wasn't what I was saying. I said I agree with the idea, and the 2-meter we're fine with. Working it out at the right time and how to work it out is
again, we're getting into that gray area again. We're not sure what you mean when you're talking about working it out. Like it's either 2 meters or it's not 2 meters.
So moving a sign, is the sign going to get moved out of the way? Or do we have to shrink our patio in that area? Those are the details.
Well, that's easy. I mean, I can answer that question for you right now. So if it's city infrastructure, if it's a sign, if it's a park bench, That's where the other portion of the recommendations comes into effect, with the money being set aside. That money is set aside in this season to move that street furniture, to move that garbage can, to move that sign. So that the onus is not going to be on you as a business owner to do that. The onus is going to be on the city to do that. So if that's your concern about implementation, I've just answered your question. The city will take care of that. It's not going to be on you. It's not going to be your obligation. It's not going to be your cost.
It's also the timing of that. Do it right in the middle of patio season, it's obviously not a time when we would like to see it. We would like to see all of the implementation of that work in the fall.
Okay, that's a different question, but thank you for the clarification. I don't think there's any more questions for this presentation, so sorry, Councillor Caudry.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and that's exactly what I was trying to clarify, is what Chair just said. If the committee agrees to delay this till the fall, what are some of the topics that you want to put on the table other than the ones that you've already mentioned? Or are those the only subject matters that you want to put on the table?
Those are my only subject matters, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So again, this time I think I'm right. There are no more questions to the delegation. So Mr. Manook is next, and I know you know the rules. Don't necessarily follow them, but I know you know them.
Good morning. Well, maybe it's good afternoon now. I've been here a while, but good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Manook. I have a number of businesses in the Byward Market. I also represent some other organizations, but today I'm just representing as Vice Chair of the BIA, the Byward Market, and my particular businesses. Obviously, my presentation, I see Yasna and Mr. Brown have brought up a lot of the things, so I don't really want to repeat those, and I want to make sure I get some things into the record. Maybe the questions will be asked, maybe they won't. I've been going through this patio thing for a long time. I was, from when I was chair of Ecovia to everything, you've seen me many times. So maybe my thought is a little blurred, but I'm usually pretty good. So how I remember the meetings happening is we had our meeting here last year, and it was to be deferred to discuss about how we were going to solve the problem. So like every time, and Yaz has brought it up, in the Byward Market, May and June, I want to make sure everybody knows, are our busiest months. And our patios, we've been fighting for years, and that's why we loved when the new patio bylaw came out, that we could have our patios up for St. Paddy's Day, and especially Easter, which is 3 weeks away. So again, right now, we're getting into that season. I want everybody to realize that this is not the right time for implementations. So what we understood last year about doing these implementations was we were going to talk about it. So from what I remember is they got a consultant firm, which was Parsons. We did meet with them in November. We talked about, and all they did was ask us questions about what we thought and what we went, because they were coming up with some recommendations. So that's really not telling us what's going on. They're asking us our input. So we give our input. Then finally in February, they come back and we meet on the street. We've met on a couple patios that had problems, or they thought, and we talked about those. Well, are we going to put them in the parking places? Are we not going to put them? So again, we're about solutions here. We said, well, what? And I remember asking this question specifically. I hope you guys, I'm usually pretty good here. I remember this question. It was like, so what do we have to do, and what are we going to do? Well, our report's not coming out for another 3 years. So we still didn't know what we were supposed to do. And we were told the report is coming out. So we were still talking about sidewalk patios, we were talking about parking lot parking. So we couldn't really go ahead and construct any patios without this report coming out. So again, I think we all sort of agree with this report. We agree that we want to make our patios handicap accessible. We agree with the 2 meters, but we weren't aware of what we were going to have to do. Like, again, how do we know that our patios meet the 2-meter requirements when we don't know what infrastructure can be moved yet. Like, we don't know. They haven't said, oh, this sign can be moved. And just to go back, I'm going to go back now. We've been going over this for a long time. We started this in 2008 with a parking study. We identified, especially around where most of these patios are, there's depressed curbs that are easily fixed, and there's sidewalks that can be widened there. We started in 2008 with the parking study, with the PPS study, and now we're going into the public realm study again. Like, this has been 10 years of going on where we can solve these problems and we've agreed with the BIA and the businesses to widen the sidewalks where I know these problem patios are. We can get more than 2 meters there. So there's other issues. So are we in doing this? Yes, but can we do some of this construction in the fall like we want? We can't be implementing this now. Again, I think that's about it. Like,
okay, under time. So just so I understand, you're wearing 2 hats here. You're as vice chair, but you're also a very involved business owner, obviously, in both in the market area and in this sphere of business, period.
Yes.
So I guess what I'm looking for is some clarification. So what I'm thinking is, I would like very much, and I was just chatting with Councillor Caudry about this again in his role on the accessibility piece. What we would like to see is the bylaw passed today. The bylaw with the 2-meter clearway and everything else that goes along with that passed today.
Okay.
I think we're open to discussion around when you have to get the work done, and we can talk about the ins and outs of that with staff. One of the nice things about this meeting and this time of year is there's a bit more of a break than a week before the next council meeting, so there's some room. But I think all of us around the table feel strongly that the work that staff has done with the accessibility community around their needs is solid work, and the measurements are solid and based on good research and consultation of what's necessary for people to get comfortably around the businesses and around the market or Preston Street or wherever it is. So I think what we would like to see is the bylaw passed today, so we're not getting into, when we talk about implementing in the fall or at some later date, we're not getting into discussion with someone such as yourself about, well, is it really 1.8 or is it 1.6 or is it 1.4? That's solid. But I think staff is open to the idea of construction or implementation at a somewhat later date to give you some time to get your plans together. To me, fall really means next spring, because most patios don't carry through the winter. Construction in the fall, but I would want, and I look at staff and I look to you, it's sort of a question to both of you. I would want to do something today that A, recognizes the substantive work done, which is what the appropriate measurements are to create the clearways, approved today. And I would also like something in place whereby, and again, we don't have all the businesses here, but we have a number of the BIAs represented, a number of the businesses, something that recognizes that you've got to get your act together, so to speak, and I use that collectively, city and this year. So we're not going into the spring where we're still discussing whether or not your patio might or might not comply, so that's what and you're nodding your head, so it sounds like that construct works.
If it's a question, like, that's what we sort of thought, like when we had this meeting last February, that we would go through, we'd talk about everything, and then by November we would have come up with some solution and say all of our applications for the new construction of the patio and the ramps and everything would have to be in by like December or January. Then it would give them time to approve them. We would have the contractors ready, and we could start building them in February and have them ready for like April 1st.
Okay, again, I'm hearing a somewhat different explanation, because what I heard before was you're going to build in the fall. That's what I heard from your colleagues, and now you're saying, no, we're going to build next February. Well, I want a solution that's finished this year.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is in October, they're going to be removed. Like, we can't do, like, in the middle of August, we're going to take our patio down and reconstruct it totally. That's not feasible. That's all I'm saying. Like, I'm up
You're the one who's asking for the deferral to the fall.
Yeah, so we're asking for a deferral to the fall to reconstruct our patios. If we do it over the summer, so we'll reconstruct them in the fall, yes. But what I'm saying is they're going to come up in the fall. Most of them will come up in the fall. They'll be gone in October.
Right.
So either if you leave it in October, you got to comply, or when you have it out again next April, you have to comply. Right?
Okay.
Right? So I agree with what you're saying.
And again, I'm looking at staff. I want to know before December 31st of this year that your patio, at least on paper, is going to comply. I don't want to be getting into discussions.
It's exactly what I sort of just said. Is it in October or whatever? We could, you could say by September, we agree that what the design's going to look like, and we have our application. And you can say the application date that has to be in is December 1st.
Okay, I'm looking at Court and his team there.
So, Chair, certainly if it's Council's will to defer the till the next patio season, I would advise that a date of this December would be appropriate to have a complete patio permit application in with the proposal for how they wish to modify their patio for next season.
Okay. Councillor Deans, I'm thinking on that.
I'm good with all that. I think this sounds like a reasonable approach. But just to be clear, we would be passing today the plan. Yes. So that's not going to be up for discussion in the coming months. The plan is the plan, right?
That's the way I feel. Like the measurements are what we think are best, so we're going to stick with those measurements.
We're going to stick with the plan. We'll have some flexibility on implementation. I think that's fine.
I would like to hear from you on this point because...
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm most supportive of that suggestion that's been made around the table. The question I have for staff, first of all, question back to you, Mr. Chair. How many more public delegations are left after Mr. Manak?
You saved the best for last. Well, there are no others.
So the reason why I asked that question is I don't want another delegation coming up with different points of view. Having said that, to want to ask staff, what does the delay in implementation do to the AODA requirements from accessibility perspective, if anything?
Mr. Chair, there would, excuse me, there would be no repercussions with respect to the city's compliance with the AODA if the deferral were granted in that regard.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do support that program going forward.
And I see a lot of nodding around the table. What I'm not sure is whether we need to take a break for staff to sit down and craft some language that captures this. Because the current recommendations don't do what we want. We want to pass the bylaw today. We want to defer implementation. We want to put some dates around December as to when those deemed complete, if you will, for lack of a term, applications are in. So do we need to take 15 minutes maybe to talk to legal and clerks to work out some language?
Yes, that'd be appreciated, Chair.
Sure. No, if that works as well. Again, but I'm with Councillor Deans. We don't want to lose in the mix that what we're doing here today is yeah. So will 15 minutes do?
Sorry,
okay,
Mr.
so we'll
Chair,
take a break till, what is it, till 11, 10 to 11? Okay, thank you. Sorry, 10 to 12. Thank you very much. Okay, we're back in session. If everybody could take their seats, please. I'm going to verbally explain what the revised recommendation is proposed to be. I will invite staff to jump in if I get any of it wrong. And again, we can certainly still have debate about what the current proposal will be, questions to staff for clarification. So I'll run through what my understanding of the report recommendations are going to be. And again, Court, I invite you, if I get any of that wrong, to let me know and clarify. So the essence of what we've come up with here is a bit of a hybrid. So today we would pass the substantive portion of the bylaw. So we would pass the bylaw in terms of the different measurements that we've talked about. So just so that it's crystal clear for all the business people out there, we're going to be getting into discussions with you about whether 2-meter clearway is right or not. Okay, we're going to pass that today, I hope. I think the will is there to do that. What we will change or modify the proposal is the implementation of that recommendation, and so a couple provisos around that. So we had talked about the fall. Various business owners had raised, or BIAs had raised the issue of the fall, and then there was some discussion about whether that meant being built in the fall or being designed in the fall or what have you. So if you recall, we switched to more than, I don't know what's going on with the lights, we switched to more than one patio season. So we now have, we had talked earlier about December. That doesn't really work with the new patio season. So the suggestion is, and the new proposal is that business owners would have their applications in, and that includes your plans for what you want to do, by October the 31st of this year, because your winter patio season starts in December. We don't want anybody going through the winter season with a non-compliant patio. I want that clear as well. So the new rules will apply to winter patio, and that gives you time to, if you're not compliant, to get it fixed before. You have to do it by April, but you will need to do it by the winter patio season. If the delay in implementation would not apply to any new patio applications, if you're an existing business asking for a new patio or a brand new business asking for a patio, you will have to comply with the 2-meter clearway and everything that goes with that. Staff we will pass the portion of the recommendations as it stands with the funding to deal with city infrastructure, and staff will endeavor to have all city infrastructure that we can removed in 2018, so that's garbage cans or street signs. If you are in doubt, pass this on to your constituent businesses. If you are in doubt in any way in looking at your plans, well, what do I do because that garbage can is there? Pick up the phone, call staff, and staff will confirm either that yes, it will be removed by construction season for spring of 2019, or for some reason we can't remove it. For example, if it's a tree, we're not likely going to want to remove a tree. Sort of thing. So, but pick up the phone, be proactive, because the date of October 31st is still going to apply to you. I think I covered everything. Staff is sort of wordsmithing, but everything else in the report will stay the same. The waiver with regard to 434.5 Preston would stay in place. No change to that. So really, the bylaw would change as of council voting on it, but hopefully we would pass that today with the recommendations and measurements. It's really just the implementation would change until October the 31st. The discount we talked about would also stay in effect, but again, you have to get your application in approved application in this year, so again, that's by October 31st. In no way are we asking or suggesting if you think you can comply by spring, and we know there are some businesses that staff have been working with that are going to be able to comply, please go ahead and do it. We encourage you to do it. The more businesses that we can get to comply as soon as possible, the better. So we're not saying to you, if you're ready to go, please still go ahead and do that. And staff will, again, work with you. Again, if there's any potential city impediments, that will sort of go to the top of the list in terms of getting those garbage cans or park benches or whatever they are out of the way versus the individuals who are going to wait for the later date of October the 31st. So did I get all that right, Court, mostly?
Mr. Chair, apologies. We were just discussing at the end there, but one thing we wanted to clarify was the proposed fee reduction would be with respect to those who apply for a summer patio permit this year and who comply with the bylaw and make modifications to that effect, not for those who get an application in this year for the 2019 season.
Of heads, I'm shaking my head a little bit on that too. Councillor Kadri?
Mr. Chair, thank you. And again, I think that makes very much sense, that in terms of if somebody complies with the bylaw going in now or as soon as possible, then they should be working with the discount that we would be approving if we pass the bylaw.
Okay. Steve wants to come back up. I agree if you don't do it next year, but if the money's in the budget this year and you get it in your application by October and you go with it, that's all. If you do comply this year, as far as I'm concerned, if it's October, you're complying this year. I agree if somebody does it next year.
No, the relief is available this year.
Yeah, no, and I hear you. And is staff saying something different than that?
If you're going to let that conversation happen, you have to do it on the audio because that's the minutes of this meeting.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Chair, I think that's fair too because it's April in the report. So I think staff are being consistent that if you do it by April, you're going to get the reduction in fees, and if you don't, then you're not. So I think that that's.
I hear what you're saying. But we're modifying the report somewhat, so I'm open to discussion.
Our whole thing is I just don't think that it's possible right now to get plans and get everything done in 2 weeks and get it in by April 1st. I think by the deadline that you're talking about, if everybody gets it in by then, I think that should apply. I agree that next year, I understand you've done this for the budget for this year and you'd have to go to budget next year, but I'm hoping that it would apply to anybody that can get it done by this year. Sorry.
So that's actually a very practical question. So from a finance budgetary perspective, what does that do to you? If some discount, if you will, is provided this year and some discount is provided into the next fiscal year.
So, Chair, we did not have these funds budgeted for this year. So the recommendations that were before you today were an approximate upwards of $70,000 impact on our revenues. So that's why we were asking for unforeseen funds from Council to offset our revenue loss because a budget to Council that we have to, of course, realize our revenue targets. So we had only forecasted permitting this till the end of the summer season this year. So what I'm hearing from the delegation and from members of council is a desire to offer that incentive this summer season, and that if there was a winter patio that operated in November and December of this year, that the discount would also apply. So it'd be a calendar year discount rather than just a seasonal discount, but that for 2019 there would be no discount offered.
Well, again, I'm not sure that's what Mr. Minuk is suggesting. I think what he's suggesting is I'm not saying I agree with him, but I think just so we're all having a I think what you're suggesting is if you comply and build in 2018, as some might do, you get the discount. Equally, if you get your application in, which would comply for 2019, you also get the discount. Is that what you're suggesting, Mr. Nook?
Sure, but if it's going to be a big problem, I would think that would be fair, yes.
Okay, so we're talking two different things here. So my question to you, Court, is what does that do to your budgeting, your finances? Is that something we can look at or not look at? Steve's not jumping out of his seat, so it's something, I think it's something he'd like, but something he could live with either way.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to bring something else up, but then again, I don't know the budget, but the budget was supposed to be how the revenues for the 4 years of council, right? For the patios?
Chair, the patio permit fees were reduced by 22% last year, and then they're increasing based on the formula that council adopted, I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago, that rises roughly with the rate of inflation.
But the question I'm asking, I think, is pretty basic. You currently have a plan which says if you comply, well, we want you to comply this year. We like you to comply in the spring, as your current report reads. And in order to do that, we're going to offer you a 25% discount. So I think the question that some of the councillors have around the horseshoe here is, can that discount be split? In other words, some businesses will be able to comply for this spring, and that's great, and we want you to. Sometimes I can say that, but we really want you to. But if you're a business that feels you can't, because you don't have your design done or you feel you didn't have enough notice, and you get your application with appropriate plans into the city by October 31st for the 2019 season, you'll get a discount.
Yes, if that's council's will, Chair, we can certainly bring us forward as part of the 2019 budget funding that would allow for a 2019 incentive to carry forward.
Well, I'm thinking of a way you might be able to do it without having to do that. So if you're a non-compliant patio now, as of April, you pay your full fee. If you get your application in by October 31st for the next season and it is compliant, then we refund you 25% back out of this budget year. So we're not touching next year's budget year. You don't have to bring any further requests for money. It's all still within this budget year. Does that work? I'm just trying to keep it simple.
I'd like to confer with my finance colleagues who aren't here today, Chair, so between now and council, certainly I'll seek that clarification, but in principle, I think that works.
So, okay, so let's do this then, if I might make a suggestion. We pass it as you first suggested. You've got to be within this year, but with the proviso that you're going to find out whether what I just suggested is a doable thing or not. If it is, we can amend when it comes to council. And I think that would meet everybody's, we're doing our due diligence, we're asking the right questions, and maybe we're not asking the right questions. So, Councillor Fleury.
So, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, you've articulated a position which the framework that we're voting on, which I'm very comfortable with. We were getting caught in the semantics, and it's very relevant, so let's finish that conversation. But on the report, I have things that I want to put on record. So, am I doing both right now? Can we wrap up the conversation as to what we're voting on, and then ask?
Sure. I'm hoping. I don't. Taffy, have you had a chance to sort of put pen to paper so we can have something up on the screen with the changes?
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So why don't we put that up on the screen so everybody can see it, and so. And that takes into account Court's original proposal on the dollars. Do we have to put something in there that says we're putting off that discussion, or that just by direction to them to talk to finance now? And that's just direction, I think, right?
Yeah, I think not just a direction, but clarity by the time we get to council.
So right now, what's on the screen is what we would be asked to vote on. This modification is what we'd be asked to vote on. So it's coming.
So while we're waiting for that, maybe I can
Ask questions to staff, sure.
Yeah, and I want to present maybe what this does. So we have 81 patios that are in the right-of-way. We're asking the 81 owners to comply. We have 2 brackets of financial incentives that are available for those owners this year. Physical changes that the city can do to make them compliant with the 2-meter clearway, check. We have an opportunity for relief, for the financial relief as part of their application for their patio component. So 2 financial incentives that are available to the 81 right-of-way patios or any new ones that will come in. Any new ones will be compliant as they come in. We're asking that the 81 be compliant as soon as possible this year. For those who don't meet the summer period, I would say November 1st, because I know that Halloween will be, all patios are up for Halloween, so in my mind that would be a small amendment to do November 1st, so then we don't get caught in another semantic issue. And then the other piece is I don't want someone to have the relief for their summer patios if they didn't meet the accessibility and clearway patio. So I don't know how we do it. I really don't mind. To me, the full 2018 period should be available for those who comply, but I just don't want to do a back incentive for someone that didn't comply in the period. That would be a weird incentive to create. So as per what the chair presented, I'm certainly comfortable. And then for our media and for those who are listening, I think it was important to present what's out there. So people, please comply. And then here are 2 financial components. And by the way, this, we did push that back. It should have been implemented in 2017. We recognize that on both sides, we didn't have the resources. Businesses had the focus on and for the events for 2017, but this is not a new measure that we're bringing forward today. We're just working through the implementation period. So on my end, I'm very comfortable with what you're saying, but I hope that the November 1st can be an amendment, and I hope that no business can receive a relief if they didn't comply during that period.
So if what you and Councillor Fourier are saying is if you don't get your plans in and approved and built for the season, you don't get a reduction.
No, that's not what I'm saying. No, I'm saying. So let's say your patio is $1,000, just to round it up, and you pay that for the summer and spring period. You didn't comply with the clearway and accessibility regulations, so you're not getting 25% off that. Then you come in for your winter patio permit. There's another fee that's there. Maybe it's $100 because it's lower in the winter. You got to comply with that. So we can give you on the relief for that $100, but we're not going to give you a relief of $1,000 which you didn't comply with the relief. I have no problem that the relief applies, but I want the relief to apply to the period by which it actually the change was implemented.
I think what my concern is that, we need to make sure that the folks, but I've got patios in my ward as well, and folks who, we have known this is coming, and I get that, it's difficult to come with a final recommendation to comply within a few weeks. I understand that. But there has to be some incentive for those folks who will comply today, who will go out, who will change the design of their patio, who will, who have thought that through, who have spent that extra money and time. We have to incentivize them too. So I think if what we are saying is on November 1st, if you come in with a plan for 2019, we'll give you an incentive. But that's a whole other year, right? So why would I today as a patio owner bother? And we do have, a very clear responsibility to pedestrians, to persons with disabilities who, have told us and are counting on us to make sure that this clearway is in place for them. So I agree that if you have a winter patio and you're going to comply sometime in 2018, Or you don't have a winter patio, but you know what? It's now October. I've had the summer to, you know, purchase my materials and redesign, and I'm going to put up that new patio, show you that it's done, to incentivize them, but to allow for that to only keep, if you actually make that clear way that we're asking for on behalf of, you know, mostly pedestrians, people with disabilities. That's a year. I don't see why, I just don't think it's fair for those who are taking the time and the effort to do it today. So that's something that
fair, that's a fair point. I can see the logic of that, and I see the sense of that. That's a fair point. Any other questions? And that doesn't include you, Steve. Okay, Councillor.
I hope it'll bring clarity rather than confuse things more here. I think what we're hearing from those who have spoken here is really an incentive or a discount is meant to incent, I don't like to use that as a verb, the right behavior, the good behavior, the direction that we want to move in. So it would be perverse if someone was able to delay constructing their patio for this season saying, oh dear, I couldn't do it in time, but I'd love to get that again next year. The discount really has to be to motivate people to try to comply for this year. If they can't, I don't want to unnecessarily use a stick and say, bad, we're going to punish you, but rather, okay, you're not going to get that reward discount for it. So there's enough complicated moving parts, the spring, summer, the winter, that I think what we're looking for is to give direction to staff that they're coming back at the council meeting to essentially lay out the muddled sort of direction we're trying to give them, with numbers, with dates, if that is the will of the committee in the way that I've just described it. You know, offer the incentive to try and comply, don't reward unnecessary delay, but also don't unnecessarily punish. If you can put that onto one chart, that would be magic.
Yeah, no, and again, as I said, I think that's fair. So any direction I gave you, you can just withdraw the direction. I think that makes it. And no, Steve, sorry, I've really bent the rules for you. I can't. Unless anybody has any further questions for Mr. Minook? Ask you to take your seat, Steve. Sorry. Oh, Councillor Caudry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just on. Mr. Minook and I were sharing some conversation during the break, and I just want to know why, Mr. Minook, with all the great ideas that you have, Steve, why would you wait till the last minute to bring this to the table? So go ahead.
Yeah, I do try to work with staff, and I know, you know, some of you tell me that I should call and talk to you and these ideas, but honestly, I've had these ideas for forever. Like when the parking thing came up, I've talked about, you know, widening sidewalks. It continues to get, and I don't want to take up more of your time, but since he asked a question, the only thing I'm going to say is, as a business person, we don't like to give up the money, and you have 125 in there, and it doesn't go to the businesses. Don't lose that if you can move infrastructure with it. Like, just that amount. So say the businesses don't use that 50 grand. If you can do what you want to do and, like, make it accessible for people, and you need that money for infrastructure, then don't give it. At least use it for infrastructure. That's all I was going to say.
No, and I think that's clearly the intent. If we have a garbage can where it shouldn't be, or a street sign and it's movable, then we're going to do as much as we can. That's certainly the intent. Are there any questions? Now you can take your seat. Are there any questions for staff? I'm going to go with Councillor Cash, because you've had a kick already, Councillor Forey, and then we'll
Thanks.
pick it up with you.
The report in general.
On the report at large and on the recommendation. So the recommendation is currently on the screen, and the change is the addition of paragraph 4, and also in document 1, there is a change at sub 2. The whole thing. So it now should read 62 sub 2, despite subsection 1, subsections 5.2 and clauses A, B, and E of subsection 5.4 will only come into force on October 31st, 2018 with respect to any pre-existing front curbside or street side patio or cafe seating patio for which approval is granted by the city prior to the coming into force of this bylaw. So those are the only changes in terms of the context of the report. So Councillor Cax, do you have a question for staff? I just wanted you to know what you were asking a question about.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can you explain, give me the context about the Pub Italia exemption and why we're giving them that exemption? I know they last year and they have a history with that, but why are we exempting them from the 2-meter clearance there? And are there any others who have approached us about that?
Mr. Chair, staff is putting forward that recommendation because of the fact that it was granted by Council in 2012, and there has been no change other than the fact that we have instituted a different bylaw under which that patio is controlled. The patio remains in location, and this is also out of recognition of the unique circumstances that you alluded to, Councillor, revolving around that patio in particular. And to my knowledge, no other patio owners have approached us specifically to request a waiver.
So what does that mean in terms of you guys done a site visit there, and what does that mean in terms of having, you know, people in wheelchairs or other sort of accessibility for that stretch of Preston?
Mr. Chair, what I will do is if we flip 2 further slides, we have here it's difficult, it doesn't present it very well, unfortunately, but it's meant to show the pinch points along the pedestrian clearway in front of Pub Italia. And what I would do is direct committee to the number 2.93, which is sort of to the left near the building line. I don't know if my it's right here. And that is the general width of the sidewalk there, but for the pinch points with trees, there are some benches that, as the discussion has gone this morning, we'll be looking to move, as well as the public art. So on the whole, for the most part, the pedestrian clearway there is over 2 meters wide. It's just in these limited instances, for that very brief instant where there may be a tree or the public art, that it reduces down to a level below the 2 meters required by the bylaw.
I remember last year too, there was some bars or pubs or other restaurant owners that came from as well, and there was a few similar spots in Elgin where some of the people requested similar things. So I'm just wondering, what are we sort of accommodating or exempting them, or how's that situation different, if at all, relative to what's happening here on Preston?
Councillor, so Elgin is a special case in that we will be redesigning and rebuilding Elgin in 2019. So the Elgin businesses are, due to something we discussed in past earlier, are exempt from this bylaw until after the work is done on Elgin Street. When the work is done on Elgin Street, it will be designed in such a way that essentially everybody will be compliant. So that's why Elgin Street is not specifically mentioned. We've dealt with that before, and it's contingent on the work that's going to, the redesign work. When that redesign work has been done, we'll have constructed the sidewalks and the road in such a way that that clearway will be there.
Okay. So outside of the ones that were here from Elgin as well as Pub Italia, there's nobody else that's requested an exemption or asked us with concerns in that regard?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Mr. Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I'm bringing up the conversation to the report level. There's 3 elements that I discussed with staff that I just want to make for public record. First one being relating to zoning infractions. So if a patio owner were to come in and ask for the right-of-way application, but was an infraction of our zoning, thinking specifically of the market, those who aren't allowed to be bars, we could restrict them getting that access. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, the bylaw gives the authority of the general manager to impose conditions with respect to the permit, and one of those conditions that could be imposed is that the associated business associated with the patio, is undertaking a use that is permitted under the zoning bylaw.
Another one, so too often we have like a, I'm sorry, but I'll move the A-frame issue, which A-frames come and impede often on that 2-meter clearway. Can you clarify what was done as part of this bylaw to ensure that when we talk about a 2-meter clearway, business is also responsible if they put an A-frame in that 2-meter clearway and have a patio, you know, they have that responsibility. How are we able to enforce that as part of these efforts?
Mr. Chair, the by definition means a clear and unencumbered area, and with that comes the ability to enforce the requirement to provide it, and as such we can require patio owners, whether it be through the revocation of the permit for non-compliance with the bylaw or through a regulatory charge, to ensure that area is kept clear. And in addition to that, there's also an educational component that we undertake with the patio owners, so we make sure that they're aware of the responsibilities and the fact that these areas need to be maintained and kept clear, so we certainly come to the level of enforcement, and that we can deal with this through education and proactive measures in conjunction with the patio owners.
Totally agree, but if there were non-compliant situations for time and time again, we would have the tools to enforce as part of this bylaw?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. One is for areas like Rideau Street, where we want to protect a wider right-of-way than 2 meters. So maybe staff can highlight what are the next steps for those areas. In this case, it's Rideau Center, connection to Byward, connection to the LRT and the transit station. So we'd love to hear on what the next steps would be there.
Mr. Chair, as you may recall, as part of the report last year, that as part of this whole exercise, there will be a design review team made up of city staff and experts in their various fields relevant to the pedestrian clearway. Those individuals will be looking at how we can have wider clearways at areas where such will be required based on the level of pedestrian traffic. The bylaw itself is set up such that the pedestrian clearway requirement for 2 meters is a minimum. It is not an absolute, so there are opportunities and the authorities in place to require, where necessary, a wider clearway in front of businesses, or patios, I should say.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I just want to speak in favor of the report. I know staff have done a lot of work. We in our city celebrate patios. They make for the time of year that we all enjoy, which is the warmer weather, the nice sun. They play an important role in the public realm improvements, and I'm happy to see that these standards apply equally to every business, so that we can get a conformity, a standard that's in place across the city for our main streets. We want to encourage businesses to work when they have options on the variety of options that you've proposed, that it be the street side spots, that it be the boardwalk, that it be changing the approach to maybe not using a platform. So I want to applaud the team in front of us for their work, and I want to thank our business for continuing to invest in our main streets and making them very desirable for our residents.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for staff? Any comments on the report? Councillor Caudry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just coming back to staff, in terms of, I want to just put it on the record, I know it's in part of the report, in terms of new patios coming online, whether it be this year or next year, have to abide by these rules and regulations if committee so passes today.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And that includes the 2 meter right away?
That includes every requirement in the bylaw, including the 2 meter pedestrian clearway requirement.
All right, thank you. The reason why I mentioned those, Mr. Chair, is through the Accessibility Advisory Committee, that was one of the important points that was raised at committee, to make sure that the exemptions don't apply to anybody new coming online, as well as that 2 meter was a key factor for the Accessibility Advisory Committee, as the accessibility devices are changing from day to day with new technology and so on and so forth. Having said all that, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you as well as staff on what I consider to be a well-formatted report and well-conducted surveys through the community, as well as other partners like the Accessibility Advisory Committee. I want to make sure that this morning we don't leave the table and suggesting or thinking that staff didn't do their work consulting with the businesses. I think staff did a great job consulting with the businesses. Maybe the issue this morning is the time factor. The time to allow them to adapt to these changes is more of an issue rather than the fact that we as staff didn't consult with the community, so our business community. So I want to thank you for that. I do want to thank the business community also in terms of working with us, because it's a difficult bylaw, as Mr. Monak mentioned. It's been in process for a long time, and I'm finally great to see it coming to fruition today. And thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, and your efforts on this report as well. Are there any other questions, comments on the report? As I said, the current proposal is on the screen, and with the addition of what I read in terms of the change to the bylaw, that changed document number 1, paragraph 2. So on the report, Councillor Moffat, are you voting on the report? Okay. Thank you. So carried? Carried. Okay, so we're back on the agenda then? Yeah. Oh, sorry, as amended. Yes, correct. Carried as amended. After all that work, yes, we don't want to lose that, as amended. Thank you, Councillor Ford. So we're back on the agenda then. And are there any motions of notice of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting? Okay, I actually have one, which I'll introduce very quickly. I won't go through all the whereases, but the motion is, therefore be it resolved that Transportation Committee recommends that Council direct the manager of PIED to forward a letter to the Ontario Ministry of Environment and Climate Change requesting that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, 1, takes immediate steps to expedite the response process for Part 2 orders of bump-up requests as part of the Section 61 review to improve the MCEA process times and reduce study costs, and 2, supports changes to integrate and harmonize the MCEA process with processes defined under the Planning Act, and 3, amends the scope of MCEA reports and studies to reduce duplication with existing public processes and decisions made under municipal official plans and provincial legislation. A lot of acronyms in there. I can explain it more next council or committee meeting rather. It's been a long meeting. Next committee meeting when we vote on it. And other than that, if there's no other business, adjournment? Okay, thank you.